Lincoln this morning. For those of you online, I'm glad to join you in your living room or wherever you may be watching this morning as well. And I'm one of the pastors at the Water's Edge in West Omaha, basically in Gretna out in Nebraska. And I'm excited to be with you guys here today. My husband Sam is here as well. We've been married for about a year and a half. And I actually grew up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I grew up a big Hawkeye fan. And Sam is from Boulder, Colorado. He went to the University of Colorado, and he's a very proud Buffalo. So neither of us ever thought we would find ourselves in Lincoln, Nebraska. But here we are, and it's been a more welcoming experience than I imagined as a young Hawkeye growing up. So we're excited to be with you, and I'm glad there's not a football game later, and I'd have to talk about the Huskers. But we're excited to be with you guys today. And I've been in ministry now for 2 years. I first met Jason, your guys' pastor, at annual conference. He's good friends with the senior pastor at my church. And we went at annual conference, and I got to know him. And just right away, like, totally admired Jason. And I'm sure you guys know this, but he just brings a lot of passion and energy to the ministry that he does. He's upbeat, he's optimistic, he is always excited about what he's doing, and I always admired that about him. And it's also why I'm so grateful that he gets this opportunity to go on sabbatical, because that energy and passion for ministry can only go so long. And this rest, I know, is going to be really good for him, and it's going to be really good for your whole church as well. Before I went to seminary, I interned at the Water's Edge, and while I was the intern there, our senior pastor, Craig, went on sabbatical for 3 whole months. 3 months, no contact. Our church and our staff, there's a lot of anxiety around that. What's going to happen? What if we need him and he's not there? But really, that was just a huge blessing for our church and community, and for Craig as well. But he came back, he was re-energized. He was able to pastor better than before. He had new ideas. He was healthier as a person. He was closer with his family. Just across the board, it was great for us, and I pray that that's what this time is for your church, and it'll be a time of growth, and it'll be a time of opportunity and excitement when Jason comes back as well. So I'm excited for you guys going through that, and I know that Jason's put together this sermon series. You guys have kind of been walking through Matthew this spring, and today we're in Matthew 5. We're in kind of the beginning of the Sermon of the Mount. So this is the greatest sermon in history. Like, this is Jesus' long sermon. He goes through a ton of topics here. Like, he starts with the Beatitudes. He talks about everything from generosity to prayer to worry. And today we're going to look at one of those teachings in the Sermon of the Mount. And when Jason sent out this sermon series and he filled us all in, he said, here's your scripture, here's what you're preaching in. I opened mine and I was like, oh no. I've got this part of the Sermon of the Mount that I really believe this is like one of the hardest teachings that Jesus gives us in the Sermon of the Mount. It's one of the toughest ones to pull off. I think it was really challenging when he said it 2,000 years ago, and it's just as challenging for us now, 2,000 years later. But also when I read it this week and was working on this, this teaching is also more relevant now than in recent history. I was reading that and thinking, like, if Jesus came back today to America and he gave another Sermon on the Mount, what topics would he include for us today? And I read this and I was like, I think word for word he would say this again. Like, we still need this reminder. We still need this teaching. And it's really tough to pull off, but I think if we do, it's going to totally change our lives. Like, if we can pull off this teaching we're going to look at today, this is going to transform us. Like, it's going to keep us from getting dragged down by the world and everything going on in the society that we live in. It's going to totally transform our relationships. It's going to help us handle conflict better when those days come. And I think most importantly, it's going to make us stand out and look more like Jesus than some of the parts of our culture that are broken. So in this section, Jesus is using this pattern, and he uses this a lot in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, you have heard it said, but I say. And he does that back and forth throughout this whole chapter. He's comparing like kingdom wisdom with our cultural wisdom and what people tell us. So he says, you have heard the culture say this, but I'm going to tell you this is actually the truth. Like, kingdom is said, here's what's true, but I'm telling you, it's not. This is actually true. So he goes back and forth comparing these, and in Matthew 5:43, he starts it off. He says, you have heard You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. When I first read that, I was like, I've never heard anyone say that to me, to love your neighbor and hate your enemy, like not explicitly. But I think in the world we live in, we've all heard this said in different ways, like in movies and TV and culture. We have heard this said. Like, there's no superhero movie where the plot line is like Superman goes and he actually spends time with the bad guy and gets to know him and has this reconciling moment and they pray together and they become friends and the movie ends. Like, of all the superhero movies that exist, of which there are hundreds, that has never been the plot line of any of them. Like, our movies glorify, like, we gotta get revenge. We have to defeat the bad guy. It's us versus them. And he's a bad guy until the very end, and there's nothing redeeming about him. He's a bad guy that we have to overcome. You know, our culture teaches us the same thing about relationships. Like, if someone hurts us in a relationship, we almost get told, like, you have the right to get back at them. You have the right to hurt them back. You have the right to give them a taste of their own medicine. And culture tells us, like, that's an acceptable way to be in a relationship. I don't have to tell you that, like, our politics today are totally broken and that it's become more about competition and not about cooperation and collaboration. There's no loving and working with your enemy, but the world has told us this: love your neighbor and hate your enemy. We've been told that. Just as true today as it was 2,000 years ago. Our culture is still telling us that. And Jesus says, but I tell you something different. He says in verse 44, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And this is the tough teaching that I said, oh no, when I read it. This is a tough teaching. I think it's really tough for two main reasons. The first one is what I just talked about. Like, our culture is constantly telling us the opposite of this. It's everywhere we go, we're being taught the opposite. That makes it tough. But the second part of this that I think makes it really tough to teach and to practice is that I think a lot of us read this morning, and maybe you're sitting here and you're thinking, I do a pretty good job at this. Like, I'm probably doing this. I think a lot of us read this and we say, like, well, I don't hate people. You know, I'm not mean. I don't, post mean things, and I don't get in arguments with people on Facebook. I'm not out seeking revenge on people. We read this morning and we kind of think, I think I'm pretty good at this. We're all good Christian people here, right? We're nice. We're polite. We do a pretty good job of this. And, I want to challenge us today to really think about this honestly and be honest with ourselves and challenge ourselves a little bit to think about, are we really living this out, or are we just being nice? Because I don't think Jesus in this teaching is saying be nice to your enemies, like be nice to their face, but deep down you still really dislike them. Or, hold your tongue when you want to say something mean, and then when they're gone, you can say whatever you want about them at home. I think Jesus is saying it's not just be polite and nice to your enemies. Jesus goes beyond that. He tells us to love them. And that command to love our enemies is a lot bigger and a lot harder than just being nice and polite to them or just to their face. That's the tough commandment that Jesus is asking us. I think a lot of us see that and we think, well, I'm pretty nice to people. I wouldn't do anything mean. But if we really think, would I love my enemy though? Like, love, that's something else. That's way beyond being nice and polite. That's where it gets kind of tough. And there's kind of two caveats that I want to add before we get into the second part of this scripture today. Two things that I think get a little bit confused when we look at this scripture. And I think the first one is we read this and we think, like, well, this just means letting people walk all over us. And if someone hurts us or does something to us, we're just supposed to accept it. And that's not what Jesus wants for us at all. Like, when he says to love our enemies, sometimes loving looks like setting hard boundaries with people. That can be love. And sometimes love means having really tough conversations with people. That can be love. It's not letting people do whatever they want. It's not letting people hurt us over and over again. Sometimes love is the tough love and being firm with people, and that can still be a form of loving your enemy. And the second thing that I like to add before we get too far in this, I know your church has been through a long week this week, and Sometimes when we've been hurt really bad, Jesus knows that we're human. And when we hear this, we say, God, I don't know if I can, love this person who's wronged me yet. I'm not going to feel love for them, and maybe not for a long time. Jesus knows that we're human. When he says this, he's not saying, feel love for everybody. He knows that's just not how it works for us. That sometimes there's pain and it takes time, and we can't just flip a switch and love them. And that's why I think he adds this really important second part of the verse. He says, I tell you, love your enemies. And then he adds the second part, and pray for those who persecute you. I think that second part is for those of us who have really been wronged by someone and really hurt, and we're looking at this and we're just like, I can't get to love yet. I'm sorry, God, I'm just not there. Prayer is the perfect place to start, even if it's a prayer of pain. I think Jesus adds that and says, I know that this is going to be hard for you sometimes. Start with prayer. Pray for yourself. Pray for your own anger and hurt. As you're able, start to pray for that person who's wronged you. Jesus knows this isn't going to come easy, and he adds those in. I think those are two really important parts of loving your enemy. And then when you get to the point where you feel like you can love them, Jesus gives us this awesome story about what that love looks like. And most of you have probably heard this story. This isn't going to be new news to you, but we're going to kind of take a fresh look at it, because this is one of Jesus' most famous stories. It's been told hundreds of thousands of times. Books have been written about it. It's been in movies. It's used in Sunday school all the time. But the reason that it's so popular is because this is Jesus' greatest love story that he ever tells. And when we look at this story, we get a picture of not just being nice to our enemies, but loving them. So this story is found in Luke 10. This is the first line. Jesus is telling this story to a group of people gathered around him, and he says, a Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. So just one verse into the story. Do you guys know what story is coming? I think I heard Good Samaritan. I'll give you guys credit. So yes, the Good Samaritan, we've heard this story. So this road from Jerusalem to Jericho, this road was notorious. You were not supposed to travel it alone. This was the dark alley that your parents tell you not to go in growing up. It was a notorious road. A lot of people, this would happen. This was kind of a common occurrence. There were bandits, there were muggers, there were thieves all along this road. You would only travel it alone if that was kind of your only option. And you didn't have anyone to go with, and you're like, I just have to risk it and try and make it to Jericho. So that's the situation of this Jewish man, and unfortunately, he gets beaten and mugged and left half dead on the side of the road. But then, of course, he has amazing luck, right? A priest walks by. Best case scenario for him. It says, by chance, a priest came along, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side and passed him by. And this would have been really significant. So the priest, this is like Pastor Jason. If he's on the Appalachian Trail right now and sees someone injured and he just steps around and goes around him and keeps going, which I know Pastor Jason would never do. He would definitely stop and help, but that's basically what Jesus is saying in this story. This is the good guy. This is Superman. This is the hero. But instead he just passes around and goes straight to the other side. So then the man lying on the side of the road has a second chance, though. A temple assistant walks by, sees him lying there, but he also passes by on the other side and walks through. So I'm an associate pastor at my church, so this verse hits home. This is the associate pastor coming up after the senior pastor and still walking around and passing the guy on the side of the road. So then in verse 33, it says, then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. So Samaritans and the Jewish people, the Israelites, have a 400-year rivalry at this point. These two people, they wouldn't talk to each other. They didn't live in the same neighborhoods. They wouldn't even look each other in the eye. They did not associate with each other. They hated each other. One scholar who wrote about this story said that it's really possible that if this Jewish man wasn't unconscious, if he was a little bit awake and this Samaritan came over and tried to help him, he might have actually pushed him away and told him, I'd rather die on this road than be helped by a Samaritan. That's the kind of relationship these two groups had. And that's what makes what the Samaritan did so amazing, is what he was overcoming and the social barriers he was breaking to do this. Even if friends did this, it'd be pretty amazing to stop and help in the lengths he goes. But, for a Samaritan to stop and do this for a Jewish person that probably would have hated him if he was awake, that's really significant. So the Samaritan goes over to him. He soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. And then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn where he took care of him. And not only that, but, the next day he continues to take care of him. He handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, which back then was like 2 days' worth of pay. He gives it to the innkeeper and tells him, take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'm going to pay the rest of it when I get back. Do whatever you have to do to take care of him, and I'll handle it. So we read this story and we think about Jesus' command to love our enemies. Like, this is way beyond being nice. This is not just nice and polite what this guy did. Like, this is generous, it's selfless, it's kind, it's love. He really shows love to this person, and it's not just being nice to their face or like biting your tongue when you want to say something mean, but then just saying it later when the person's gone. It's not just avoiding doing something hurtful. It's actively and intentionally choosing to do something loving to this person that he's probably been taught not to trust and not to associate with. So there's 3 things in this very common story. We've heard it a million times. But there's 3 things that stand out to me here that I think Jesus would challenge us to try and apply to our lives. Like, when we think about loving our enemy, going beyond being nice, there's 3 things we can do here. So the first one, love your enemies even when it's not convenient. This is the lesson that the priest and the temple assistant missed out on. The priest, he's an important guy. He's probably busy, He was probably guest preaching at a church somewhere that Sunday, and he had to get home and finish his sermon. He's a good guy. He does a lot of good deeds. He missed out on this one, but he'll make up for it later. This circumstance just wasn't convenient for him at the time. So he crossed to the other side and kept going. And I think we do that a lot. Like, I would do that, but it's just not convenient. I'll get the next one. But loving our enemies means choosing to do that even when it's not convenient for us. And Jesus challenges us with this in John 15:13. He says, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And Jesus here obviously is talking about he's going to actually lay down his life, but he's also inviting us to lay down our lives in ways for people too, like laying down your time, even when it's not convenient, laying down your pride, even when it's not convenient, like laying down resources like the Samaritan did to help others. When we love people, it requires sacrifice, and it's not always convenient. Sometimes we're going to have to lay some of this stuff down. Like when you've been at work and there's a coworker who's just been annoying and rude the whole day and not helpful to you at all, and then like at 4:30 when you're getting ready to leave, they say, can you help me with this project quick? Can you stay a little bit and help me? And you're kind of thinking, no, you've been rude to me this whole day, and now you need my help with this. You want me to stay late. You want me to give up my time. Jesus says, love your enemies means even when it's not convenient, and it means laying some stuff down. Maybe there's someone with different political views, and they're just going on this rant at the dinner table, and you want so bad to just go off and tell them exactly how wrong they are about everything. It's not convenient for us to lay down our pride in that moment, but maybe it's the loving thing to do in that situation. So the first one is love your enemies even when it's not convenient. And the Good Samaritan, he did this. He laid down his time. He laid down resources. He laid down his pride to go above and beyond to help someone who might not have done the same for him. So the second thing I see in this story is that love sees the person, not the label. The Good Samaritan didn't care that this guy was an Israelite. He didn't care about his past. He didn't care about his political views. He didn't care who he was or what he did. It said he had compassion on him. He saw someone hurting, and that's the only thing that mattered to him, is that this person was hurting and needed some compassion and help. Right after Jesus tells us to love our enemies, he adds this really interesting verse right after it. In verse 45, he says, He, God, causes the sun to arise on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the righteous and unrighteous. And the reason that Jesus adds this is he's reminding us, like, it doesn't matter what anyone's label is according to the world or the labels we've assigned to them. They're all children of God. We all have sunny days. We all have rainy days. We all have good things going on. We all have tough stuff going on. And we're all children of God. And that person that is an enemy to us is beloved to God and invites us to love him the same way. So I remember earlier this year on January 20th, which if you don't remember was Inauguration Day. And I unfortunately was doing the one thing that everyone said not to do on that day, which was scrolling on Facebook for hours on end and just reading all the stuff that people had to say that day. And I remember I was scrolling and people are fighting in the comments section and posting memes that don't mean anything and all the usual stuff. And I remember I scrolled and there was this person, this woman who goes to the Water's Edge in our church, and she had posted this really beautiful prayer on there for President Trump. Praying for his life, for his family, for him as a person. And I remember seeing that and I was like, oh, she must be a Trump supporter. Like, I didn't know that about her. But she posted this prayer for him. That must, be who she supported. And, I kind of kept scrolling. And then a few pages down, I saw another prayer, same woman on her Facebook, and it was another beautiful prayer, and it was for President Biden, for his future presidency and what he was taking on, and for his wife and his family, and for him as a person. And I had never seen something like that. I remember thinking, okay, first of all, now I have no idea which side she's on. I don't know who she supports. I still don't know. But after reading that, I totally didn't care who she supported because I saw her heart in that. And I remember saying, that looks a lot like Jesus. Of all the mean, horrible things that I had read through that day, like that was a bright spot where I had no idea what she believed about politics, but I do know what she believed about Jesus Christ and that she was going to follow his teaching and love her enemy or love those that she doesn't agree with. It's a really beautiful example of love, like not caring about labels, but seeing the person. So third thing from this story, and this is probably one of the hardest ones for us in this story, but the Good Samaritan shows us that love doesn't expect anything in return. Like, he gave so much to a stranger, he didn't expect anything in return. When he took him to that inn and paid his bills and said, I'll pay more if it goes higher, just do whatever it takes to take care of him, it doesn't say, and then he left an IOU and said, when he wakes up, tell him he owes me this much. That's not part of the story. The Samaritan had no requirement for this guy to pay him back. He didn't care about that. And it was a totally free act of love. And this is the last part of the love your enemies teaching that Jesus gives. In verses 46 and 47, he says, if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Even the pagans do that. If we only give to people that will repay us back in some way, Jesus says, that's not really love. That's more just a transaction between you and that other person. If we offer the bare minimum to be polite and nice to someone, that's not really love. Even the pagans would be mostly nice to your face. But if we're going to love those who don't love us back, it's a little bit harder. That's taking it a step up, and Jesus invites us to do that, to go beyond what most people are willing to do and love those who don't love us back. So here's how we can test this one in our lives. And I said at the beginning, I want us to be honest with ourselves. So here's how we can test if we love those who won't repay us or pay us back. You don't have to raise your hand. Just think to yourself, has this phrase ever come out of your mouth or gone through your mind? Well, that's the last time I do anything for them. So if you're like me and you're being honest, yes, that's gone through my mind a few times. You give a ride to your friend to the airport at 7 a.m., and then you need a ride at 7 a.m., and she's like, I don't know, it's too early. And you're like, well, that's the last time I take her to the airport. If she's not going to do it back for me, what we're really saying here is, I did something nice for you, but if you're not going to do it back, if you're not going to show me the same in return, then I'm not going to do that for you anymore. I regret helping you in the first place because you didn't pay me back, and that's not love. We don't get credit for doing those good deeds when we just want something in return, even if it's just a simple thank you. Like sometimes we do something for someone, we go out of our way, and we feel like they're not grateful, and then this runs through our head. That's the last time I go out of my way to help them. They didn't show any gratitude. And Jesus says, that's not really love. Like at the end of the day, you're still trying to get something for yourself. That's not what love looks like. And again, he's challenging us to just set the bar a little bit higher for ourselves. So I want to end today with just a story, and I just heard this like on Wednesday night a few days ago, and it's the best story I heard all week, and it's a perfect example of loving your enemies. There's a woman in our church who like manages and runs a bunch of assisted living centers for they're like women's assisted living centers, nursing homes, facilities, and she said they have, chefs there that cook for them. All 3 meals are provided, and she had this group of women that came to her one day and said, like, we don't like the chef. The pizza doesn't quite have enough cheese on it, and he overcooked my pork chop one time, and, we just don't like this chef. We want you to fire him. Of course, the woman at my church, like, this is a great guy. He's a totally fine chef. These people wouldn't be pleased by anyone coming in. They just were really picky, and she didn't have to fire this guy, but they got so many people in the nursing home on board, like, we're not going to eat this guy's food. We don't like him. You got to get rid of him. We need a better chef. So on Thursday, she had to let him go. And she brought him in, and she said, like, this is not your fault. Like, these people will never be happy. You're a great chef, and we hope you find another place to work, and I'm so sorry that we have to let you go. And so she brought him in like at 4 p.m. towards the end of the day, and after she had that like tough conversation with him, she said she told him, like, I know that this is when you would usually go cook dinner, but like just go home. Like, we'll find someone else to do it. These women were mean to you. They don't deserve for you to like go cook them a nice dinner. You can just go ahead and grab your things and head home, and we'll figure it out. And she said, the guy said, I'm gonna go cook dinner. Like, I'm scheduled to be here and cook them dinner. I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna prepare a meal for them. When they're done, I'm gonna clean up, I'm gonna wash their plates and forks and spoons, and I'm gonna wipe the table down. And then when I'm done, I'll go home. So after this group, got together and lost him his job, he went back and he made them dinner. And he made them this like wonderful steak dinner. And then when they were done, he went and wiped their table down and swept the floor and cleaned up after them. And, he could have chosen revenge, and he could have chose to hold a grudge and be bitter. But he chose love. And, maybe those mean, spiteful women, like, learned a lesson that night. Maybe they didn't. I don't know. But I think the real winner was this chef, because he could have left that day really angry, and maybe a little bit of hate in his heart, and holding a grudge and wanting revenge and just being unhappy. But because he chose love, I think he started that process of healing, and maybe he still left upset, and he probably did. But I think he was one step closer to moving on and experiencing forgiveness. I think, the heavy weight that he could have left carrying was a little bit lighter, because he chose love. So maybe they learned something, maybe they didn't, but his load was a little bit lighter. And when Jesus gives us this command, it's for our relationships, but it's also for us, because anger and hate and grudges and bitterness, those are heavy things to carry around. And Jesus says, I have a better way, an easier way. And if you're thinking of a person right now that's in your head and you're like, I'm just not there yet. Like, I could not go cook them a steak dinner. I'm not wiping their tables off. Jesus says, I know you're human, and that's going to happen. Start with prayer. Even if it's just for you the first time, and you're not quite ready to say that person's name, start with prayer and, start that process of healing, because this command is for us as well. It's going to make our relationships better, but it's going to make us healthier. And he gives us this Good Samaritan story, and he knows these are not easy things to do. Like, it's not easy to love when it's not convenient. It's not easy to love and get nothing in return. It's not easy to get past those labels sometimes, especially when our world just loves labeling everybody. But he says, if you pull this off, like, you're going to be in a better place. There's no doubt about it. This is going to be worth it to you. I know revenge seems really tempting, but I tell you, there's a better way. There's going to be a better way. And, you know, the band is going to come up and sing this song. I'd never heard it before when they sent me the order of worship. It's called Bigger Than I Thought. And I went and listened to the song this morning before coming in here. And I don't know if they planned this on purpose, but this is the perfect song for this teaching that Jesus gave us today. Because I think a lot of times loving our enemies, that's hard for us. And we can't pull that off on our own. And sometimes you think like, God, I am never going to get over what this person did to me. I'm never going to get rid of this pain. I'm always going to carry this anger. But God is bigger than we think. And God's going to help us get there. God's going to help us give some of us his forgiveness for that person. He's going to take away some of that pain for us. He's going to work grace into our lives. So, like I said, if there's that person or that group of people or something on your mind that you're like, I don't know if I can live this out with that particular person, I hope this song reminds you, like, God's bigger than we think, and he can help us get there. So let us go to God and let us pray, and then we'll worship with the band. God, we come here today, and as we read your words in the Sermon of the Mount, we confess that we have not perfectly lived this out. We have not always loved our enemies. We've sometimes been tempted to choose revenge. We've talked behind people's backs. We've picked fights and arguments. We've carried a lot of anger and hurt and pain, and in response sometimes wanted to just return that pain and hurt and anger to the person that gave it to us. And God, we just ask that you give us grace today. Remind us of how much forgiveness you've given us, and help us forgive those that feel really hard to forgive. God, you set the standard with what love looks like, and we will never be able to live up to the love that you offer, but God, we just ask that you help bring us one step closer today to loving and looking like you. And God, when it feels hard and we're not sure if we can do anything to get rid of this hurt, we just pray that you're with us and help make us whole, help make us look more like you. Lighten that heavy load of hate that we sometimes carry with us. God, be with us throughout the rest of this week when we encounter people that we disagree with, that are rude to us, that hurt us, that we just don't get along with. And God, when we encounter those people this week, give us your eyes to see them as children of God, and remind us how much you love them, and that we can love them in the same way. We ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen.